in here. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started with the second part of this session, which is focused in on accountability for CDFI certification. One thing I do want to note is that if folks do need to jump off early because we may go over the hour, please feel free to jump off, and we will have this session recorded. So if you don't catch the tail end, you'll get it in email, as well with some supplemental documents that we'll be providing with the recording. So I'll hand it back over to Terry.
All right. As Chriselle said, we're going to talk now about the accountability, the new certification accountability requirements. Since the beginning of certification, accountability was really evaluated by the CDFI fund, primarily based on the composition of your governing board. The degree to which the CDFI fund would determine, using their methodologies, how representative your governing board was of the specific CDFI target markets that you serve. So this is different than just kind of saying, oh, we have a very diverse community in terms of race and ethnicity, and our board is very diverse in terms of race and ethnicity. That's great, but if you are certified to serve a CDFI investment area, they're going to look at specifically how many of your board members live in investment areas. If you're certified to serve low income, they're going to look at people who are either themselves low income or, work for organizations that predominantly serve low income. So it's very kind of specific to the CDFI definitions of the communities that you serve. Credit unions have an option under the new standards, and we're going to go into this a little bit more detail, to meet the requirements based on a combination of the composition of your membership and the use of a community development advisory board. And we'll talk about that. What are the pros and cons of the different ways that you can meet the accountability requirement? First, if you're looking for this in the guidance, it begins on page 201. Like I said, the guidance is kind of a long document, but you can cut to the chase by going to the accountability section, 201. There are described in that section 4 different options for meeting accountability. 3 of them apply to credit unions. So the 3 options, the first one is kind of the traditional one, the old-fashioned option of just using your governing board, your board of directors, and then making sure that at least 33% are accountable to your overall target market. They have specific requirements for who needs to be accountable to specific target markets. However, for this first option, this is the way the credit unions historically have met the accountability requirement. But under the old standards, this is kind of an important detail. The CDFI fund, for whatever reason, did not actually require credit unions on an annual basis to update their accountability, to demonstrate on an annual basis following board elections that you still meet the accountability requirements. Under the new standards, changes in your board composition would trigger a review to make sure that you still meet this standard. So as a result, the annual election of board members can result in a change in the composition of your board that might affect your ability to meet this standard. So that's, again, since, board elections, you can't necessarily say, we're losing our board member who, you know, lives in a CDFI investment area, and she was the one that kind of gave us accountability to investment areas. So we will only accept candidates from our membership to fill that seat from people who live in the investment area. Like it becomes kind of a very, very difficult scenario for credit unions to manage. But fortunately, under the new standards, there are alternatives, two other options that allow for the use of advisory boards, which can provide a much more stable source of meeting the accountability requirement, because you can specifically recruit members of advisory boards to, to fulfill these particular requirements. And also there is no mandate that, could result in them, rotating their membership or changing or being up for election on an annual basis. So, advisory boards, once they are in place, they can provide, kind of much more assurance and stability that your source of accountability is met year in and year out. Needless to say, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but needless to say, you know, there are much more significant benefits to having an advisory board than just meeting your accountability standards for CDFI certification. So, if you are putting together an advisory board for the first time, please, you know, do it. Just don't do it to meet the accountability requirement. Please do it in a way that it serves the purposes, the objectives of your credit union, because they can be, we know dozens and dozens of credit unions that have used advisory boards for many years to increase their profile, expand their membership in certain communities. They can be very, very powerful engines of growth for credit unions. So, don't lose sight of that. Don't just focus on what the CDFI fund wants, because these can be very, very powerful. There can be very powerful benefits for your credit union. Of the two advisory board options, the third option is reserved only for credit unions. So credit unions are the only kind of CDFI that can meet the accountability requirement strictly by using an advisory board, not a combination of the advisory board and governing board. So, this again is an option that can be very powerful for credit unions. There are a lot of benefits to doing this. It is based on both a profile of the advisory board and a profile of your total credit union membership. The requirements for the composition of the advisory board are pretty clearly spelled out in the guidance. So when you are putting this together, you want to make sure that you follow the specific advisory board requirements. There are board policies that must be board approved policies that must be in place prior to your certification application. These policies, by the way, do not have to be in place 6 months before you submit your application, but nevertheless, I would recommend that you do it as early as possible. And, again, these policy outlines are quite specific. The number of seats on an advisory board, you have to have at least 5 members. You have to have, at least one member of your governing board sitting on the advisory board. Have to spell out what the process for selection is, and so on. But again, the guidance is very clear and very specific about what you need to do to put together an advisory board that is representative. It's important to going back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago, representative of CDFI target markets. It's not, our community is equally made up of men and women, and so is our board. Men and women are not CDFI target markets. So that's, that is undoubtedly, an important part of reflecting your community, but they are specifically looking at the 3 types of target markets: investment areas, low income targeted populations, and other targeted populations. And what they consider to be representative is, again, spelled out in some very detailed tables. So this can help you say, well, we need someone that's representative of an investment area. You can, look at kind of the specifics of what they consider to be representative of an investment area. In putting together an advisory board, you want to focus on the target markets that you are using for your certification. So if you're able to get certified only using CDFI investment areas, say, and you don't need to use low income targeted or other targeted populations, then your advisory board really only needs to be made up of people from investment areas. I mean, you can by all means include, other representative people, again, for the benefit of your credit union. But to meet the CDFI funds requirements, they're going to be looking at the target markets used for your target market test. And for most credit unions, that's going to be a mix of investment areas and low income targeted populations. So if those are your 2 target markets, then your recruitment of advisory board members should focus on people that, by the CDFI funds standards, can be classified as representative of that target market. If your target market is based on other targeted populations, obviously you would do the same for OTP as well. And with that, I can stop sharing and we can open this section up for questions as well.
Thanks, Terry. I'm not seeing any in the chat, but if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question, feel free to do that as well. Okay. Well, during the webinar session, I did provide the links to the documents as Terry was moving through them. So you have a link for the CDFI funds page, the CDFI certification 2024 guidance link, as well as the FAQ. We will be sending these recordings. You'll receive them in 2 different recording sets, so you can listen into them separately. Inclusiv, we've also created some PDF documents to kind of checklist these 2 particular items of primary mission and accountability. So you'll receive those in an attachment as well with this recording. But I do want to just give people one more opportunity if there's a question that's coming up that we don't end before we answer your question. It looks like Darian has something in the chat. For clarification for board accountability, if we use both IA and LITP, which is investment area and low-income targeted population, to determine target market, should our board member have to be accountable for both? Or, sorry, it jumped. Be accountable for both, or can they all be accountable for one, such as investment area?
If you are using both IA and LITP, it would be better to have, at least one representative from each of the target markets. And I believe that might even be spelled out in kind of the detailed requirements, but it just makes sense if they're certifying you based on those two target markets, they're going to want to see accountability, some accountability to both. So, you would want to build an advisory board that has some people, like one person might actually fit both criteria, right? They might actually qualify as being accountable to LITP and qualify as being accountable to investment areas. But you would want to construct the advisory board so you had representation from both of the target markets that you're serving.
Great. And then Martha had a question: is the advisory board required before the 12/20 deadline?
Yeah, the policies must be, the board approved advisory board policies must be in place prior to submitting your application. And again, the sooner the better. The application will, as with your governing board members, if you are using governing board members to meet your accountability requirement, the CDFI fund, there's a process of validating that they meet the requirements. You have to say, how are they accountable to, say, an investment area? And you can say, well, they live in an investment area, and you can demonstrate that by saying this is where they live. The same process would be true for advisory board members. So it's not something that you want to wait till the day you're putting in your application. And, even though the policy can be, technically done just the day before, it takes time to put these structures in place, to find people that are willing to serve on your advisory board and so on. So, it's best to get those things in place as soon as possible.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I think we're good to close it out now. Again, I just want to thank folks for being on. This deeper dive series is happening every other week, and we will be hosting 3 sessions. So this is the first of 3. So just want to make sure that you all know that next week we will be canceling open office hours because our team will be at the Governmental Affairs Conference for America's Credit Union. So we hope to see folks at our CDFI roundtable. We will also have Juntos Avanzamos roundtable, MDI roundtable. Our state and national profiles are available if you'd like to have those. They're on a link on our website. So do reach out if you need that link, or you can navigate to the inclusiv.org page. So next week we will be canceling due to GAC, and then we will be back on again for the second part of this 3-part webinar series on the 13th, which we will be talking specifically about developmental services. So we hope that you all will join us for that session as well. Again, just want to say thank you to Terry for taking us through that deeper dive. Thank you folks for being on the call today. And look forward to any follow-up questions that you have. Please do feel free to reach out to us. And then excuse me, and then also sending you the recordings and the PDF documents. So hope everyone has a great rest of your Wednesday. And thank you all again for joining us today. Bye-bye, everyone.